Draper out of the equation. As you look to the future, I believe that Gunnison will be part of the solution, that the county jails will continue to be part of the solution, and hopefully be able to take a higher level of prisoners. Right now, they take the very easiest prisoners. To continue to be a player, they kind of need to ramp up their security and take a higher level of prisoner too. So we look at Draper and we say, okay, if we're going to spend, and let's say it's $200 to $400 million in the next 10 to 15 years to expand our prison system and to fix the facilities that are in Draper, as a state, would we rather put that money in Draper, or would we rather put it someplace else and make a new 70-year decision about how do we want to do our prisons? The prison authorities have said about 4,000 to 4,500 prisoners is maximum for the efficient operation of a facility. So they're pretty well at capacity in Draper. So if we were going to do something else in Draper, we would actually start what we would call a separate prison facility. So it would have a separate warden. It would be a different facility run separately from Draper. So as you think about moving out of Draper, staying in Draper, we're at a break point anyway. So we need to look and decide whether that land now is so valuable to us. And I don't want to see strip malls on that land. If we move the prison, the governor's view or vision is that we would have something like Research Park up by the U, which is a very special project. So if in fact the prison does move, I would hope that that land is used for something special and not just for residential or commercial uses. I hope it really goes for something special. So we have a consultant in place and timeline now on what I would hope would happen. Our consultant will be back to us in early January with the first thing that has to happen is what do we expect to be the growth in our prison population over the next 10 to 15, 20 years. And I hope as part of that study, we can circle back and redo the judicial system, as Judge Atherton talked about. So I don't want this one to run down one track and turn a blind eye to the judicial system. I think these two things have to go hand in hand, and we look very carefully at who we're putting in prison, off parole and probation, how we're putting people back in prison, and we kind of rethink our judicial system about alternatives. And if we blend those all together, I think we can come to a pretty good solution. But it's going to take a lot of political will. There are a lot of legislators that are feeling rushed and feeling like we've got to move forward, and I'm very comfortable with where we are right now. So this consultant will come back and give us their recommendations in January. What I hope to take to the legislature is a master plan of where the prison system should go in the next 10 to 50 years. That master plan could include keeping some of Draper. It could include keeping all of Draper. It could include starting to shut down Draper over time and to move out to different facilities. Do we have a centralized prison or do we have a decentralized prison? As you go out there, you've got a geriatric unit that's got old men like me that are in a dorm. And they don't need the same kind of security that your maximum security prisoners need. When you talk about fences and you talk about all these other things, we've got a big facility that's housing people who've made drug mistakes. And they're rehabbed, and there's a very successful rehab rate there. They don't perhaps need that same level of security. So can we break these facilities up and get a more appropriate level of security around how those facilities are built? So centralized, decentralized. How do we keep the county jails involved? How do we keep Gunnison involved? And how do we make it all work? So I hope to bring a master plan to the legislature with a specific recommendation that we can start immediately to catch up on the beds that we need built immediately. And then through the next year, we will have architects work to work on actual architectural designs of what a new prison facility should look like, and then go out to bid with RFPs that we would bring back to the 2015 session with specific recommendations for costs and for starting to then go and build and expand the prison wherever that site may be. So that's kind of what we see. And I think just to reframe the issues that we've We've talked about judicial system, programming. How do we rehabilitate prisoners better than we do today to give them a better chance of success as they re-enter society? The best solution for employees, current employees, in terms of relocation and how the prison works with 2,200 current employees, 1,500 volunteers who are very critical to the rehabilitation of these prisoners. And wherever a prison site is developed, we have to consider those things, as well as every day many prisoners are transported either to the hospital or to the courts. It is very expensive. Can we look at different models of how we do those things and how we blend all of those into a solution that's going to serve the state of Utah well for the next 70 years? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now are going to open up the floor to... This microphone has got issues, sorry. So you guys should donate to the Girl Scouts so they can get a new microphone. We're now going to open up the floor for questions for our speakers. Judith has got a microphone. She'll bring it to you. If you raise your hands if you have a question. So if you would just speak your name, maybe stand up. Go turn it on.
One, two, three.
No. Let me, I'll walk over here. You've got the other one. Let's try one more. No, just...
I'm Maxine Haggerty, and I have two questions, actually. What goes on at Gunnison? Who's there? And why are they there and not in the other prison? And then who is this consultant who is going to help you?
So, who would you like to have answer your question?
Steve is the first one.
Steve is the first one.
Whoever can answer.
Gunnison.
Okay.
Gunnison is a facility that holds 1,600 inmates. We have about 192 level 2 inmates, which are maximum security. The rest are general population inmates. We have a security system of 1 through 5. 1 would be death row. 2 would be maximum security. 3, 4, and 5 would be general population, where a level 4 can work outside of the facility but on prison grounds. A level 5 can work off prison property. There you go, it works. Okay. Those inmates that are there, it was decided in 1990 that they would build a prison in Gunnison. As Chairman Summerhays stated, your lane, that's good. I say you get in the habit of doing that, but you have a centralized facility, which Draper is. That means all kinds of inmates are there: female, death row, maximum, minimum, mental health, geriatric. In Gunnison, it has general population inmates, very few mental health inmates, no death row inmates, no female inmates. And it has really revitalized central Utah. You think of little Gunnison and Salina and Mayfield and Centerfield. 400 jobs in that area means a big boost to that economy. And so it's a very clean, nice facility, but that's why it was built, is in central Utah, is to help that area, and it's done a very good job, actually. We have just one little side note, we have a horse program in Gunnison where there's over 1,100 horses, and the offenders, the BLM brings in wild Mustangs. The offenders break those horses, and people can go buy those horses. It's very good. It's a very good, but it's a programming facility, quite a bit of programming.
So the second part of that question was, who is this consultant? We did an RFP to ask for a consultant.
Yeah.
Gotta press that piece of tape. Yeah, press that now.
To get a consultant to come in and help us to evaluate what is state-of-the-art facilities today. MGT was the winning bidder. They are a firm of nationally recognized former prison authorities and employees, managers. They bring the very latest in thinking in what's working in the prison systems of America and what isn't working. And I feel very comfortable that they're going to help us to identify very best practices as we look at building and programming a new facility.
Judith.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is directed to both the mayor and Chairman Summerhays. Talking?
Yeah.
Okay. You talked about after doing this process that the legislature had to have the political will to do that, and my question is kind of twofold. What do you think it would take to make the legislature have the political will to come up with the tax money? And secondly, how can citizens help the legislature make that decision?
Well, as was stated, I think, by all of us in a sense, but more specifically, Steve mentioned that he was happy at this point, actually everybody did, with the process now. And I think as the process started and it has come to this point, there's been, you learn as you go type of thing, but you also, as you learn as you go, you tend to bring up and bring in more things that probably have a specific bearing on the outcome or the final decision. And I think the legislators that are on the committee are listening very well. Obviously, in a sense, they represent the entire legislature and the governor. But I think the process is going quite well, actually, and I think the answers to some of these hard questions are not totally answered yet. The other part of the question was, how do citizens have some influence? Well, you're doing it tonight, I think. I think it says in the bill that some sort of open public meetings are desirable, and I think they should have more of these. Like we said earlier, like when I mentioned I was talking to Catherine about what the general public thinks when they think or drive past the prison or Gunnison or a county jail or whatever. They usually think of 3 words: crime, punishment, and rehabilitation. But there's so much more to that. I mean, it's people's lives that we're dealing with. And obviously, if they're in there, they've done something that is not acceptable in our society. But when they say that what the high percentage of those that are rehabilitated or re-enter society and that, it shows that that's possible. And that's where we need to, through, I think, input such as the league here, their input, that that will actually happen through this process. So don't quit, keep coming out.
I applaud your looking at this issue systemically. I'm Ellen Brady, Dr. Ellen Brady. I applaud looking at this issue systemically because I think there's plenty of room for reform at so many levels in the system, and it sounds like we really do need modernization. My question relates to the public perception that's out there that much of the impetus for this whole thing was driven by the need for certain legislatures who are in real estate development to get their hands on the property. I'd like to have you address that, as also whether or not there's any option to consider in this mix redevelopment of the Draper site or enhancement of the Draper site. Or to say no, this is not.
Well, in looking at the property itself, and when we look systemically at what can happen, as Judge Atherton mentioned, really the parameters that we're operating in as an authority are pretty limited. but we have encouraged legislators and others to go back and to do a judicial review as part of this whole review. And I would suggest each of you, as you contact legislators, that you really encourage judicial reform as part of this whole look at our prison systems. Criminal justice.
Criminal justice reform.
Judiciary's fine.
Yes, the judges are doing great. Judge Judy has her own TV show. Yes, I'm sorry, I misspoke. So criminal justice. Now, when you look at the land in Draper, you know, I'm a citizen, and I would hope that as a state we hold on to that land and we participate in the development of that land, so we control how it's used, and we sell it off in pieces, and perhaps even participate in the development of if there's a nice office building that's going in there, maybe even participate in the development and sell it as a developed property. In other words, look to maximize the return to the taxpayers of the state of Utah. That's me speaking, and I speak probably as a citizen there, but that's what I'm encouraging as we talk about what happens with that land. And you think about that land right now, it's probably the most strategic and valuable land along the Wasatch Front. You've got 700 acres that sits right between Salt Lake and Utah counties. And there could be some very, very special things done with that land. And I think as we look at putting prison facilities somewhere, we probably could put them on ground that isn't that expensive. But having said that, that decision has not been made.
Just a comment relative to the public perception. I don't know that that's going to be shaken, frankly. I think the best thing that I can say about that is that this is a diverse group. It was developed as a group that is meant to be independent and meant to assess things. And I think the only way the perception will change is if we do the job we've been given to do.
Just a quick comment. Hopefully it goes along with what has already been said. As far as the position of Draper City on this particular property, I think part of our reasoning, obviously, that all of that acreage is in Draper. We have no desire to see it become high-density housing. We have no desire to become strip mall. If it becomes anything, we want it truly to be a true benefit to the entire state, obviously to the two counties, obviously to Salt Lake County, to everyone that will participate in the benefit from it as another prison, if it's chosen, will benefit the entire state, and particularly the population that will be in there because of the betterment of the programs there. Draper City would like to be very much involved. We don't want it turned over to a developer or developers that have just free reign. That's the last thing we want. We want to be involved in the development process so that they go through our city standards and adhere to the highest of development process if it happens.
We have a question in the back.
I'm Susan Lynn, and I have a couple of questions. Number one, I used to work at the state hospital when there was the great big old building, and Dr. Kiger had the lockdown facility there. And it no longer has that old building, and it has a lot of buildings, which I assume some of them, do they have some of the, are they still just evaluating, or are they treating inmates at this point?
For mental health issues?
Uh-huh.
They treat them.
So there are a certain number down there at the provost facility?
There's two. We have 2 beds at the Utah State Hospital.
And that's it?
That's all.
However, also there's a forensic unit at Utah State Hospital that is locked down with treatment, and a lot of people are there under guilty and mentally ill pleas or convictions, where there is alternative incarceration that's a judicial decision as opposed to it's before getting into the corrections system, where they are certain findings need to be made in order for them to be housed there, and they ultimately could be transferred out to the prison, but there is a group of convicted felons. Then there's also a larger group of people who lack the requisite competency. But the forensic unit there is actually a great place.
Yes. The second thing, I don't think this one works.
Yeah.
Is it working? Oh,
Yeah.
good, okay.
As long as you're not waving it around.
Okay. The second one is, a few years ago, we did do a prison study, the league did, and we focused a lot on the possibility of the prison being, the construction of the prison being turned over to a private company. Is that still a consideration, or and when you talked about bidding, would bidding also be turned over to private companies being part of that system?
Well, and anyone will be able to submit a bid.
So private companies
So
are
private both, well, whoever builds it will be private, but are you speaking about private operators, private
yes,
prison operators?
private companies who will be operating the prisons.
They will no doubt make proposals. There are pluses and minuses as you look at the private operation of prisons, and those things will be evaluated, but everything's on the table.
My name is Steve Hamilton.
Mr. Hamilton, how are you?
Just so you know, I was part of the problem. I'm trying to be part of the solution. I got a question for Mr. Turley and then another Mr. Chairman Summerhays. My first one is, Steve, what's the current expansion capacity for Gunnison? I know Gunnison was to be expanded. I know several pods were available and then when funding ended, but what right now, how many people could you have in Gunnison utilize all the property and expansion?
That's a very difficult question, but I'm going to answer it the best I can. We have a lot of ground in Gunnison that we can expand. With that being said, there's not as large as workforce in Gunnison that there is where you would have in a more metropolitan area. And so when you talk about expanding Gunnison, part of the problem is even if you have the land that we can build, part of the issue would be the workforce is not available in Gunnison to expand very much, but we can expand.
How many pods
Well,
constructed that aren't being used right now?
No, it's 100% full.
Is it 100% now?
Yeah, and we're as Lane mentioned earlier, we're running near operational capacity, very near that. So could we boost? Could we build 2,000? Sure, we could. But could we find the workforce for the security issues, for the therapeutic side, for the clinical side? Could we find enough workers to work in that area? That's a question mark, and that's what the consultants are doing a study on.
Okay. And for Chairman Summerhays, this is a question about the consultant. It sounds like one of the things that expansion was, although it hasn't been determined, was an issue. Many of the states that have looked at this issue before actually decided to look at ways to reduce the prison population. In fact, I think one of your former boards, was it from Indiana or Illinois, that on the former committee, that was a representative for his state. Was it from Indiana or Illinois? He was on not this current commission, but was on before. But I think it was Illinois. When they looked at reduce the population, and I wanted to know is that on the table with the consultant? Because, and the reason I bring that up, currently in the United States, over 50% of the population, prison population, is are nonviolent drug and property offenders. The projection is by the end of 2015 that threshold will be met in Utah. So again, are we looking at is reduction one of the alternatives on the table for this consulting group?
Chairman Summerhays has deferred to me.
Well, Chairman Summerhays sounds too much like Chairman Mao. I would just rather have Lane works really good.
So Lane's referred to me. I think that those observations are very good, and I certainly favor that. I think it's something that at the present time we're stuck with what we have, and Steve is correct, of course, that we're up at the prison now is at capacity. There are alternatives to incarceration that can be explored, and the state of Utah is not different from other states, and it's not different from the federal system, which incarcerates a large number of drug offenders in the, I think it's fairly well recognized, the failed war on drugs. And so that consideration of alternatives to this type of incarceration is certainly something that needs to be considered. Where we'll go with that, I don't know, but it's I personally favor that inquiry very much.
Let me just interject here. The prison,
we average right now 9 male offenders a month on an increase and 3 female inmates a month on an increase. So that's 12, so about 144 a year. So each year we're building 1 new pod just for the increase. What we'd love to see, instead of a graph going like this, what I'd love to see is a graph going like this. And community corrections plays a big piece in that. And this is why the criminal justice system, we need to take a hard look at that. There's several states, Colorado, Oregon, Texas, that are closing prisons down because they've found whatever their recipe is, a better practice, if you will. They're going downward rather than going upward. And this is why Lane and Judge Atherton mentioned earlier, Judith. We're getting corrected all over. Mentioned that we got to take a hard look at this, and I just think it would be terrible if we didn't look at it. As long as we're looking at this entire process, is, for example, female offenders right now, we are 100% full, and we're having to put them out at the prison. We're 100%. We're having to put more out in the county jails. So that's another issue when we start looking at a possible relocation. Don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see what the legislature decides. But we're 100% full of female inmates. And so I just tell you those figures, we're averaging about 144 a year on the upswing.
And can I just, when you say we, does that include the consultant? I guess is my question. The consultant.
Keith, you already asked.
No. When you talk about the scope of the consultant's work, when you talk about reforms in the criminal justice system, those are outside the purview of our committee.
That's right.
And so we need each of you, as we have, to encourage legislators and others to make that part of this process. It's not part of our process, but it needs to be part of this entire process. We're encouraging it. We need you to encourage it as well.
We're going to come up, you and Karen, okay? So.
Let me just say, while we're moving from what Lane just said, that's the good thing about, one of the best thing that we're seeing what happen is bringing this thing to light, and how important it is that, even though it's not under our jurisdiction, it's how important it is that that particular issue is focused on. When we hear the 140 or 50 growth every year, now's the time to focus on turning that around. So.
How many volunteers do they have at Gunnison? Do they have strong
About 400. About 400.
Right. It sounds like a pretty good number out there. The other thing I'd like to say is that when the prison moved, that is when Sugar House Park was developed. And at that time, there was a huge pressure to do something other than the park. And I hope that as we look at, if the prison were to move elsewhere, as we look at possible uses of the land, that we include something that will be as wonderful as Sugar House Park has been to all of the people in Salt Lake County. We lose parkland all the time, and this is one thing that I think should be considered in the development of the land.
Just like they did the quarry.
I have a few questions too, whoever would like to answer them. Do you have any plans, or have you discussed as a committee taking some recommendations back to the legislature to expand the committee's purpose and add some additional things, especially surrounding allowing the public to have more information and more involvement in this process as it occurs? Perhaps providing full disclosure about who does own the land around the prison systems, just so that can be put to rest, or at least acknowledged as fact. I'll let you answer that one first.
Well, first of all, what we have tried to do with this commission is to be very visible and to be very transparent. So our meetings have been open. We have tried to work in the light of day so everybody sees what's happening. And again, our goal is when we're done that we will have good data that we can present to everybody that shows why we've reached the conclusions we've reached. And so everybody can be comfortable at least that there was a thought process that went into it. I can guarantee you not everybody will be happy with whatever the decision is and whatever the recommendations are, because that's the nature of our society. But we plan to be very transparent, and as property is developed, I believe everybody will know who is awarded every piece of ground. I think that information, it'll be in a bid process, I'm sure, and it'll all be public information, I would think. So I don't think that ground will be developed under a cloak of darkness either, if it's developed.
And just another question for anyone. I'd actually like to hear everybody's comment on this, if you are willing to do so. And that is, as the prison population around the country increases, so have the profits and the number of private prison organizations and their lobbyists who have put millions and millions of dollars into criminal justice reform in the way that I don't think any of us are happy with. 50 years for, marijuana because you possess a firearm. I would just like to hear your comments on that, if you can. Because I noticed our consultant is one of those organizations.
Our consultant is not an operator of private prisons.
They are a consultant of private prisons.
No. They are an independent consulting group. They don't have any ownership interest in any private prison.
No.
They may do some consulting
Okay.
for them. They would do consulting for anybody.
Okay.
I've got 3 lined up. Hold on.
Hi, my name is Leona Sheetberg, and in light of the discussion and what you presented, especially with the increase in the prison population.
We can't hear the question.
What do I do?
Just put the L, speak right in the
Stand up.
Okay,
There you
can
go.
you let me know? Okay.
Yeah.
In light of the increasing prison population, and in light of the justice system as it is right now, it seems like the whole issue of relocation is premature. It seems like that what's more important is to look at what do we have in our prison. And you may have already done this, by the way, so look at the recidivism rate, look at, what sentences are appropriate, what needs to happen to decrease that prison population, learn from the states where that has occurred, and then have a discussion about what prison is needed and where should it be. Can you just comment on that, all of you?
just one of us. I would say again that when you look at a thorough review of the criminal justice system, that's outside of the scope of what they've tasked us with. And while all of us in this room would agree that that needs to be part of the process, and there's some momentum being gained that that is part of the process, but we've got to move forward with the best estimates we can. One of the issues that's driving this is, go back to reframe the issue, we're out of beds. And so whether we decide that we want to move out of Draper or we don't want to move out of Draper, we've got to have more prison beds. And how many more we need will be impacted ultimately by reform in the criminal justice system. But at some point, you know, that'll turn around. But I suspect we will have a need for some expansion in the prison system.
Can that not be part of your recommendation? Like, you know, let's put this on hold, and it looks as though we may need to look at how we incarcerate people, for how long we incarcerate people.
Yeah, you know, that takes political will. That's a legislative issue. And we have a specific charge. And as citizens, you can make that known to your legislators. And I certainly share your concern.
And maybe move the money over to the mental health side.
Don't get me started on that.
Put drugs and vending machines and get it over with.
But there are lots of things that can be considered. There has been a process of increased incarceration, mandatory incarceration, over the years I've been involved in the criminal justice system. And that's a political decision. Those decisions are political, and we, as sort of a side benefit of this commission, these issues are being raised. And there are 4 legislators on this commission, 2 senators and 2 representatives, and it's a legislative decision. I had one other thought, but I'm retired. Let's fly right through right now. Oh, now I remember. But the fact also remains, not just that the prison population at the present time is growing, but the facility is in need of changes. And if you take advantage of an opportunity to go out there, this is an aging facility, and so putting it off is not something that's in the best interest of the community either. So we're stuck in a spot that is difficult, and I don't know where to go from there, but it is not an easy situation. I agree.
Yeah, let me just say what Judith just said. Whether we relocate the prison, whether we rebuild on Draper site, whether we just tear it down, and you know, a lot of schools are being torn down and just built right on school property. Well, they could do that at Draper. That's what the consultants or legislators said. But let me just mention what Judy has just said. We have 0 air conditioning in all of Wasatch. Wasatch houses 1,000 inmates. So during the summer, when you have in one building 1,000 bodies plus staff, plus a culinary cooking food, and there's 0 air conditioning, and would cost millions to put it in. That's so in conjunction with Judy. That's part of it. It's an older facility, and whether we tear it down and rebuild where it sits, a new location, or leave some there and decentralize, as Lane has spoken of, the facility is in need of repair. It's getting dated.
Okay, we have time for like 2 more questions.
Karen's got one, and I told the gentleman over there I would.
Okay.
I'm going to respond really quick to this question everybody just answered. It made me stop and think about some of the meetings we've had over the course of several months, and very similar thoughts have come up after some of the things have, been brought up in those meetings, even though it's what we've been told, because the attorney that meets with us and kind of directs our focus on the actual responsibility will remind us that that's outside of our responsibility. But it's also, I remember one day one of the commission members said, it sounds like we're being expected to expand our responsibility, and that's when we were reminded that no, we're not. But with that said, and I think it's been said here several times, I just want to re-emphasize it, I think it's bringing to light some of these issues, a lot more than they were prior to this all starting. So I think there's definitely going to be good in these areas of trying to curb the growth and the returning back into prison and how programs are administered. I really think that that's going to benefit from this. Thank you.
My name is Karen McCoy, and one of the things that has not been addressed at all this evening, which I'm personally very concerned about, is you look at making that decision of where you're going to put a new, whatever, prison. And that is the issue of families. I would like to see hard data, not just anecdotal, but hard data that says how many families live within a 30-mile radius of, let's say, Draper. That they can, because we know that part of rehabilitation and reintegration has to be understanding the family and the focus of integrating with those families when they come back out. So is that going to be part of your data gathering as you look at any site, moving, staying, wherever, of access for families